Hello, my friend, and welcome to Vivid Voices. Tonight I have something special for you, a collection of calming bedtime stories to help you drift off into a peaceful sleep. So, gently put on your headphones, close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let your mind relax as these soothing tales carry you into the night. Sweet dreams await. Once upon a time, deep in the heart of a forest, there was an old castle, and in that castle lived a wicked enchantress. She had powers unlike anyone else, and her favorite pastime was turning innocent maidens into birds. These birds would flutter about in cages, trapped under her spell, and there they would remain, unable to escape. Now, there were many villages surrounding this enchanted forest, and the people knew all too well to stay far away from it. But one day, a young couple, Jorinda and Jorindel, who were very much in love, ventured into the woods. They weren't thinking of the enchantress. No, they were simply enjoying the fresh air, the singing birds, and each other's company. As they wandered deeper and deeper into the forest, they became lost. The trees grew taller and the sunlight dimmed. Before they knew it, they were standing right in front of the enchanted castle, and they could feel the dark magic closing in on them. Suddenly, Jorinda's voice grew faint, and she became pale, as if the life were being drained from her. Jorindel tried to hold her, but she slipped from his grasp, and before his very eyes, she was transformed into a nightingale. The poor bird sang a sad, mournful tune, trapped in a tiny cage held by the wicked enchantress. Jorindel was frozen in place, unable to move, unable to speak. But the enchantress, with her cruel smile, cast him aside, allowing him to leave the forest with no harm done, except for the loss of his beloved Jorinda. Jorindel returned to the village heartbroken, but he couldn't bear to give up. Every night, he dreamt of rescuing Jorinda, and every morning, he woke up more determined than the last. He spent days and weeks trying to find a way to break the enchantress's spell. Then, one night, he dreamt of a magical flower, one that could break any enchantment. It was small and golden, glowing like the sun itself. When he awoke, Jorindel knew what he had to do. He set off at once, searching high and low for this magical flower. Days passed, but Jorindel did not give up. At last, one morning, just as the sun rose over the horizon, he found it, a glowing golden flower, just like in his dream. With the flower in hand, he hurried back to the forest, determined to face the enchantress and free his beloved Jorinda. As he approached the castle, the forest grew dark and eerie once more. But this time, Jorindel was not afraid. He marched right up to the door and held out the magical flower. The enchantress's spells melted away in the presence of its power. Jorinda, the nightingale, flew from her cage, and as soon as she touched the flower, she transformed back into her human form. The enchantress was powerless to stop them, and she fled the castle, never to be seen again. Jorindel and Jorinda, now free and safe, returned home to their village, their hearts filled with joy and love. And from that day on, they lived happily ever after, forever grateful for the magic that had brought them back together. And so ends the tale of Jorinda and Jorindel, a story of love, courage, and the power to overcome even the darkest enchantments. Once upon a time, there was an old donkey who had worked hard for many years, carrying sacks of grain to the mill for his master. But now he had grown weak, and his strength was fading. The poor donkey overheard his master saying that since he was no longer of use, he would be sent away. The donkey didn't like the sound of that, so he decided to leave on his own. "I will go to Bremen," said the donkey to himself. "I'll become a musician there." And with that, he set off down the road, braying a little tune to lift his spirits. As he trotted along, he met an old dog lying by the roadside, panting with exhaustion. "Why are you lying there, looking so sad?" asked the donkey. "Oh," replied the dog, "I'm getting old and I can't hunt anymore. My master wanted to get rid of me, so I ran away. I don't know what to do." "Well, why not come with me to Bremen?" said the donkey. "We can be musicians together." The dog thought this was a splendid idea, so the two of them continued on their journey. A little while later, they came across a cat sitting on a fence, looking as miserable as can be. "What's the matter with you, old fellow?" asked the donkey. "I'm getting old," sighed the cat. "My teeth aren't sharp enough to catch mice anymore, and my mistress didn't want me around, so I left." "Don't worry," said the donkey. "Come with us to Bremen. We're going to be musicians there, and we could use a good purr." The cat agreed, and off they went. As they walked further, they passed a farm where they heard a rooster crowing at the top of his lungs. "What are you making such a fuss about?" asked the donkey. "Well," said the rooster, "I overheard the farmer's wife say she's going to put me in the soup tomorrow, so I'm crowing while I still can." "Why not join us instead?" said the donkey. "We're going to Bremen to become musicians." The rooster thought that was much better than becoming soup, so he joined the group and the four of them set off for Bremen. Now night began to fall, and the animals grew tired. They hadn't reached Bremen yet, so they decided to stop in a forest to rest. The rooster, who had flown up into a tree, spotted a light in the distance. "There's a house over there," he called down. The animals followed the light and soon came upon a cottage. Inside, they could see a band of robbers feasting and counting their loot. The animals were hungry and cold, so they decided to scare the robbers away and take over the cottage for themselves. The donkey had an idea. "Let's all sing at once as loud as we can," he said. So the donkey brayed, the dog barked, the cat meowed, and the rooster crowed, all at the same time. The robbers, hearing this terrible noise, thought a gang of monsters had come to attack them. In a panic, they fled into the forest, leaving their feast and treasure behind. The animals entered the cottage and helped themselves to a hearty meal. After they were full, they found cozy spots to rest for the night. The donkey lay down on some straw, the dog stretched out by the door, the cat curled up by the hearth, and the rooster perched on a beam. Later that night, one of the robbers returned to the cottage to see if the coast was clear. But when he entered, the cat leaped at him and scratched his face, the dog bit his leg, the donkey kicked him, and the rooster crowed from above. The robber ran back to his gang, terrified, and told them the house was haunted by horrible creatures. The robbers never dared to return, and the four animals decided that the cottage was a fine place to stay. They never made it to Bremen to become musicians, but they lived happily ever after in the cottage, content with their newfound home and friendship. And so ends the tale of the traveling musicians. A story of how even those who feel old and useless can find a new purpose and happiness in life. Once upon a time, there was an old dog named Sultan. Sultan had served his master faithfully for many years, guarding the house and protecting the livestock. But now he was very old, and he had lost most of his teeth. His master, thinking that Sultan was no longer of use, said to his wife, "I fear it's time to get rid of Sultan. He can't guard the house anymore, and we could use the space for a younger dog." The wife, who had a kinder heart, replied, "Oh, don't throw away the poor creature. He's been loyal for so many years. Let him live his remaining days in peace." But the farmer was not convinced. "He's no use to me now," he said. Sultan, lying nearby, heard every word. His heart ached with sorrow. He loved his master, and the thought of being cast aside made him sad. He wandered off into the fields, not knowing what to do. As Sultan sat under a tree, feeling sorry for himself, his friend the wolf came by. "Why so glum, old friend?" asked the wolf. Sultan explained, "I've grown old and lost my strength. My master wants to get rid of me. I've served him all my life, and now he says I'm no longer useful." The wolf thought for a moment and then said, "Don't worry, Sultan, I have a plan. Tomorrow morning, your master and his wife will go out to the fields to bring in their hay. They will take their little baby with them. When they leave the baby on the grass while they work, I will sneak in and pretend to carry the child off. You, being the loyal dog that you are, will rescue the child and chase me away. Your master will be so grateful that he'll never think of getting rid of you again." Sultan thought it was a clever plan, so the two friends agreed to meet the next morning. The next day, just as the wolf had predicted, the farmer and his wife went out to the fields with their baby. While they were busy working, the wolf sneaked up, grabbed the child gently in his mouth and began to run off. Sultan, who had been waiting for the moment, ran after him, barking furiously. The farmer and his wife heard Sultan's barking and turned to see the wolf running off with their baby. They screamed in terror, but just then Sultan caught up to the wolf and chased him away, making him drop the child safely on the ground. The farmer ran to his child, picking him up with great relief. "Oh, Sultan, you brave and loyal dog," he cried. "You've saved my child. How could I ever think of getting rid of you?" From that day on, Sultan was treated with the greatest respect. He had the best food, a warm bed by the fire, and no one ever mentioned getting rid of him again. Now, the wolf expected Sultan to repay the favor by letting him steal one of the farmer's sheep. But when the wolf came to claim his reward, Sultan refused. "I cannot betray my master," said Sultan firmly. The wolf was furious. "We had an agreement. I helped you, and now you owe me." But Sultan stood his ground. "I'm sorry, but I won't harm my master or his flock." The wolf, angry and feeling cheated, decided to take matters into his own hands. He called upon a wild boar, and together they plotted to attack Sultan and teach him a lesson. The next day, the wolf and the boar went to Sultan's house, ready to fight. But Sultan had overheard their plans, and he had called upon his friend, the three-legged cat, for help. Now, the cat wasn't much of a fighter, but Sultan knew the wolf and boar didn't know that. When the wolf and boar arrived, the cat stood on her hind legs and stretched her back, looking fierce. The wolf and boar were so frightened by the sight of the fierce warrior that they turned and fled without even putting up a fight. Sultan and the cat laughed at how easily they had scared away their enemies. From that day on, Sultan lived out his days in peace and comfort, never having to worry about being cast aside again. And he never forgot the value of loyalty, both to his master and to those who truly cared for him. And so ends the tale of Old Sultan, a story of loyalty, friendship, and cleverness. Once upon a time, in a little village, there lived a poor old woman who had gathered some beans to cook. As she prepared her fire to cook the beans, she dropped one of them. It rolled away, and when she went to pick it up, she accidentally knocked over a straw and a coal as well. Now, these three, the straw, the coal, and the bean, fell out of the fire and found themselves lying side by side on the hearth. The coal, which had been glowing and was still red hot, started to crackle with excitement. "Oh dear," exclaimed the coal. "If I hadn't jumped out of the fire, I would have surely burned up into nothing." "Yes," replied the straw, "and if I hadn't gotten out when I did, I would have been consumed by the flames too. We are lucky to have escaped." "And I too," said the bean, sighing with relief. "If the old woman had put me in the pot, I would have been cooked, and I would be gone by now." The three of them, feeling quite fortunate to have narrowly escaped their fates, decided that they should stick together from now on, since they had all faced danger and come out safe. "Let's set off on an adventure together," suggested the bean. "We'll find a new place to live, far from this kitchen." The coal and the straw agreed, and so the three of them set out on a journey, hoping to find a place where they would be safe from fires and boiling pots. They hadn't gone far when they came to a stream. The little brook was bubbling and flowing, and it presented a new challenge. The three friends stood at the edge, pondering how they might cross the water. The straw, being long and thin, came up with an idea. "I'll stretch myself across the stream, and you can walk across me as if I were a bridge." The coal and the bean thought this was a great idea. So the straw stretched itself from one side of the stream to the other, forming a little bridge. The coal, being the bravest of the three, went first. Carefully, it began to cross the straw bridge. But as the coal got halfway across, the straw, being so dry and fragile, began to catch fire from the heat of the coal. Suddenly, the straw snapped in two, and the coal fell into the water with a sizzling hiss. It was extinguished immediately, vanishing in a puff of steam. The bean, who had been watching from the riverbank, was so startled and shocked by the disaster that it began to laugh uncontrollably. But the bean laughed so hard that it burst its skin wide open, Now it seemed that all hope was lost for the poor bean. But just at that moment, a kindly tailor happened to be passing by. Seeing the bean in distress, the tailor took out his needle and thread and sewed up the bean's split skin. Ever since that day, all beans have had a little seam running down their sides, a reminder of the time when the straw, the coal, and the bean tried to journey together. And so ends the tale of the straw, the coal, and the bean, a whimsical story about friendship, misadventure, and the lasting marks of a laughable moment.